Welcome to How We Get Through, the podcast where we share stories, mental health insights, and healing advice on life's everyday challenges. I'm your host, Jen, a licensed therapist and founder of the How We Get Through app. Today's guest is Abby Nordquist, a licensed couples therapist in Syracuse, New York. On this episode, Abby and I unpack why conflict spikes during the first few years of parenthood and why making major decisions together can feel like an uphill battle. Listen in as we dive into these issues and the impact of post-pandemic stressors on couples and parents. Hi, and welcome back to the How We Get Through podcast. Today, it's an exciting day. I have my really good friend, Abby Nordquist, on the podcast today. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist in upstate New York. What? In addition to her therapy practice, she also offers courses and programs for couples who want to reconnect and reprioritize their relationship after becoming parents. She loves helping couples because she knows firsthand how meaningful it is to have a connected, supportive relationship with a partner as you're navigating the ups and downs of parenthood. I mean, can we all agree on that? Abby, thank you so much for being here. This is so fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. So really quickly, Abby and I met in January 2022.
Yep.
Feels like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
But we did a 9-month program together and we became fast friends on Voxer. We've never met in real life. But
not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm coming to you in October.
Yeah.
So it'll be so fun. So Abby, first, we like to start off every episode with a mental health myth, and we would love to know yours specifically around couples and your expertise.
Yeah. So I was trying to think of one that connects to this course, which is on when couples are struggling to make a big decision. And what came up for me is something I hear a lot in my therapy practice and then in some of the work I do with couples outside of therapy. And I think we tend to have this mentality or this expectation that if we have a really good, healthy relationship with our partner, then we're going to somehow magically want the same things, or we're going to somehow be on the same page when it comes to big life decisions. And I think we can get a little anxious and insecure if that's not happening. And I think sometimes we can start to wonder that, what if something's wrong with us or we're not, meant to be or something like that. And I really think that isn't so helpful. And in my experience, both professionally and personally, I think it's really, really normal and common for couples to really sometimes fundamentally disagree about kind of what they want or where their life is going to go or around a specific decision. And so I tend to see those moments as times for couples to work through things together and to kind of grow in their ability to work things through versus feeling like they should arrive at that, kind of juncture already knowing where they're going to go together.
Oh, that's so good. I think it just brings up that point of like romanticizing your life too. And, I think some people can be really avoidant in conflict as well, or they're really you're the couples expert. I don't see couples, but I almost feel like there's two camps of maybe there's a lot of conflict more often or there's none. And in my case, there's not a lot of conflict in my marriage, but when there is, it feels so big. Like it feels so heavy and it's just like this, what do you mean? And then it's that is this not supposed to be right? Is this that anxious thought of how do we get through this? What is happening? And so it can kind of feel like just like a slap in the face. What is happening? And so, I think I'd love your opinion of these kind of two camps, or is there a different way to kind of view that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, we all have a certain dynamic around conflict in our relationship, and there's definitely some common patterns. And I would say the most common ones that I see are around kind of having I'm thinking about attachment language here and attachment cycles around a pursue withdraw cycle where one person's kind of more, wants to talk through things more and is feeling kind of more anxiety or urgency around a conflict and is kind of maybe more frequently reaching for the other person to try to talk through those things. And the other person is, less into that and, tends to be, wants to pull away from that conflict and feels overwhelmed or they don't know what to do in the moment. But then the other one, and this is one that I actually saw the most in the couples that just came through my recent round of Missing Us, was a more avoid cycle, where both people tended to kind of avoid the conflict until it either blew up or they never really had the conflict, and then they kind of were left with a lot of negative feelings and feeling disconnected. And so those are definitely the most common presentations I see around how people manage conflict within their relationship.
Man, that's so interesting, the avoidant part. And I'm wondering, I mean, I don't think there's any research in this, but I'm just like kind of speculating if that's part of burnout in some way within the last, I think from 2020, like there's another thing we have to kind of sift through or work through when all these other layers were kind of just being hit on. It's like the one thing that we want to rely on or the one thing that's safe, like, oh, we have a problem here too. Like, I'm wondering if that's, I don't know, a part of it in some cases, if that feels the most common that you've seen recently, or if it just feels like, I don't know, that's where people are currently.
Yeah, I think that I do think that especially, I mean, I tend to see this maybe more in the earlier stages of parenting, which is kind of where I do a lot of work, is that there are so many other factors. There are so many other stressors and pieces, and parents feel like they're just surviving and like trying to get all the things done. And their relationship with each other can kind of, it can feel like a lot of people, I think, feel like it can take the backseat, like it's a little bit more stable. And they just don't have the time or energy to really work through things with each other in those stages. And so I think that can lend itself to more of that avoid cycle that can be really stressful. And that works for a time, right? But over time, if those things kind of are building up and it's leading to more disconnection, it can, be harder to work through. And so I think a balance of acknowledging that and validating that yes, of course, in the earlier stages of parenting, it's going to be hard to find as much time as you used to work on your relationship and talk through things. But that as you're kind of progressing developmentally as parents, I think it becomes more and more important to kind of reshift some of that focus and make some real intention around prioritizing your relationship with each other.
So the burnout of just being a parent is what happens there.
Yes. For sure.
I feel that. I get that. I am your ideal client. I have 5-year-old,
I know you are.
year-old. But I would love to know your experience of why you got into couples work. Have you had the same experience of feeling like distant from your husband?
Yeah.
Tell us everything.
Yeah. So we have a, I don't know, I was going to say a more unusual story, but maybe it's not that unusual, where we met in middle school and started, dating more seriously in high school and fell in love and got married actually at the end of college. And so we've been married almost 20 years. Our 20th anniversary is next year. And we were married for about 9 years before we had our first child. And so we had a long time to kind of really solidify our relationship. And we worked through a lot in those years and really kind of worked towards a really secure relationship with each other. And then we had our daughter, who's now almost 11, and things really shifted. I especially had a hard time with the transition to parenthood, but I think it was tough for both of us. And our connection with each other just felt so different. We had all these years and all this time of a lot of focus on each other, and that, bringing a baby in and then struggling, with some postpartum depression and anxiety and just difficulty in the adjustment. My relationship with him just felt so different all of a sudden. And that had been kind of the thing that, felt really stable and secure for me before then.
Just not your
Really,
whole life.
exactly. I know in my formative years, it has been, like a secure base for me. And so he and I really had to figure out, like, how do we do this? How do we, you know, um, take care of this person whom we love and has a whole lot of needs, and we're trying to develop our relationships with her and our identity as parents, and how do we, do the best we can with our relationship with each other. And it took a lot of intentionality and a lot of time and kind of, I don't know, like problem solving, like figuring out like how do we make this work and how do we create this structure for our relationship in a way that we couldn't, the things that we did before we became parents, we just couldn't do anymore, And so that was such an important process for us, and really took a few years. And then we kind of had to redo it again. We had our second child 5 years later, and it's almost like you have to start over. You kind of go back and have to figure it all out again. And so it's just been a piece that I personally have felt like has been so important for myself. And then it's the piece that the couples I work with in therapy just tend to really struggle. And it's, it makes sense. It's those early years of parenting, the research shows have the lowest levels of relationship satisfaction at any point in our lives. And so it makes sense, but I tend to see people maybe just kind of accepting that and feeling like, well, we'll just wait till our kids get older and then we'll reconnect. And I'm just a believer, and I don't think you have to. I think there are things you can do when your kids are little that can really set you up for a stronger kind of foundation and to kind of carry you through those years instead of putting it off and waiting until, life gets a little less hectic.
Right. Because then at that point, you might have lost the connection completely.
Yeah.
So can you give me a timeline, because you've been together with your husband for so long? Like, when did you get married? When did you have a child? And then when did you go to grad school? Like, were you a therapist when you were kind of in this rocky place with your first kid?
Yes, I was. Yeah. So we got married at 22. I went to grad school at 25, maybe. And then we had our first baby when we were both 30. So I was definitely a therapist, and even being a therapist, and I worked with kids at the time, I still didn't really know, I didn't know what was going on with me. I felt it was very, bewildering and, kind of decentering in a lot of ways, even with that background.
Yeah. And so you mentioned missing us, which I know what that is because I'm your friend and supporter. But can you talk about missing us? And when you talk about, I see that I'm your ideal client, but what is this like? What are the ages of your children? Like, who are you actually talking to? And because I think there's you're in the trenches for a certain time, and then there becomes a little bit more capacity and relief. And so I'm just curious from your point of view, what does that person look like, or what does that couple look like?
Yeah. So I think I think the main thing is that it is, I think, for parents. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, I think the examples that I'm giving and the ways that I'm trying to help couples make sense of their relationship are so, connected to their experience of being a parent. But I just think there's some really unique challenges that parents have in their relationship with each other, that if you don't have kids yet, or your kids are much older, I think they just aren't the same. So much of what we're working on is how do you develop some routines and habits for your relationship so that you don't look up and it's 10 o'clock at night and you haven't spoken to each other all day. Right. But I think any age kids, in our last round, we had, people who had babies, and then all the way up to, 7, 8 years old. I think it really just kind of depends on when you're ready for that. And I do acknowledge that a lot of couples, it takes a little while to have the capacity, emotionally and time-wise to add on something where you're going to really focus on your relationship. But I think whenever couples are they're ready for that, they want to put in some time and effort, and they just want a little bit of structure to do that, I think they can be a really good fit for the program.
Which brings a good point of like, what do you think are some signs that you're needing more connection from your partner? Like, how does somebody actually recognize that? Because we're so like, speaking from experience, like just in it. And, my husband and I are building like this business and doing these things and trying to care for kids. And I just would love to know, like, how can we kind of like bring awareness to when we're needing like the structure or something like a program to really kind of force us to make the time to do it?
Yeah. I mean, I think the two most common symptoms that I see from couples is either feeling just really disconnected, like you're kind of living really parallel lives. Like maybe you're a great team and getting kids taken care of and getting, the house cared for, but you're not feeling like there's much happening between you two, or kind of just a lot more increased conflict, and a lot more agitation and bickering and snapping at each other, and just feeling a lot of dislike and kind of is more of that negative stuff. So it's either like an absence of closeness, or it's like the presence of a lot more negativity, that I tend to see being the symptoms of it. And then I think and sometimes people will notice that and they'll do things on their own. They'll read a book, they'll listen to some podcasts, like they'll do some things, and that will spur things along enough. But I think when people have tried that and either they felt like it wasn't quite enough, or they just need something where they're doing it together, I think that makes a big difference. And that was something I was really unsure about, if I could get couples to do a program together, with all the time constraints and schedules. And I didn't know, and I had people tell me like, it probably won't work. You'll probably just get one person to do it. But I decided just to go for it, because I really just think that, there's plenty of, there's plenty of things you can do on your own to help your relationship. But I think the real change happens when we're both invested in it and we're both making the time and learning the same things together, and have a shared understanding, a shared language, a shared kind of perspective around what we're working on. I think that's where people really start to feel like some progress is made.
Yeah. And I think, I hear this a lot from my own clients too, of like they're having an issue in their relationship. And it is like, I'm not a couples therapist either, but I'm always like, you can only control yourself, right? Or you can only manage yourself, or you can communicate your side or your feelings. But I think also for me as a therapist, I'm like, I don't know what's on the other side. I can like imagine or predict, but it's hard, I think, on that one-sided piece to make real change. And it's almost like that recommitting to each other again, right? Like we are recommitting to working on our relationship. It takes time. We're going to make the time to sit down and do this together, which I think is like a beautiful reminder in itself that a couple can take the time to take a really good program that like really forces them or gives them space to reconnect or sit with things that have been bothering them, because it's so rare. Like we just don't think about it. It's like we're just going to keep going. I think in my experience, like my husband and I are a great team, like 50-50. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but like most things in life, like with the kids, with the household, I mean, I just feel with the business, we are like just doing it. And I think we can get really swept up in that. And then we lose the connection to ourselves even. And then I think that's how it happens for me. It's like I lose this connection with myself. And then I'm like, then I lose my connection with my partner. And so really trying to remind myself that I need to get back online. And then I can't force my partner to get back online, And so really creating a space for that, I think, is like invaluable and so important.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And I love that you're connecting that to needing to be present and connected to yourself before you can really connect with someone else, which I think is really nice. And yeah, I think, I thought about this at some point towards the end of the program was it feels like even the act of signing up for something like this and like doing something like this together, whether it's this program or it's like we're going to read this book together at the same time, or we're going to take this course, or we're going to go to therapy or whatever, the act of doing that, I feel like is kind of romantic in and of itself. Like there's something about that like I think communicates to the other person how much you care about the relationship and about them, and that you're willing to, spend the time and money and energy to do something like that, which I think that in and of itself is like, can be really big. And I think, especially in parenthood, we're often giving so much of that energy and time to our kids, and it can feel so nice to be on the receiving end of it from your partner.
Yeah. It almost kind of feels like it mimics the proposal in some way, this like recommitment towards each other. So I'm thinking of like big life, events of the couplehood, like kids are it, but it's not, it's almost that's like a commitment to another person, like your child. But like that choosing, or even if you're not married, but this like intentional choosing of each other, which if you get married, it's like, that's it. And then you're not forced to choose each other again, or there's not like room. You have to be really intentional again of like choosing each other and choosing to work on the relationship, which is hard when you get lost in parenthood.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I love that, like finding big and small ways to continue to do that. And I even think we do that with like our time, like if we choose to spend time together at night, we choose to like plan a date, we choose to whatever, like we're kind of reestablishing that and really communicating a priority.
Yeah. Listen, yeah. And so seeing you were a couples expert for the How We Get Through app, we kind of settled on, something very specific, but how to make big decisions with your partner. And I think in my own clients and other things, it was like, how are we going to move? Are we going to have another baby? Like really major things. And I just think you did a really beautiful job of like walking people through that process, because it's like it's a meaty course, you're going to get a lot from it. But because it's so complicated, because you're dealing with two people, two different experiences, two different attachment styles, two different ways of thinking, and trying to really align them on the same level. So I would just like to know, like, what has been your experience in walking couples through making a big decision? And did you have fun making the course?
I sure did, Jen. I sure did.
Tell me how fun it was.
It was really fun. I loved it. It was like something so cool to do together. And my first time like writing out a full script like that and really having to think through, things in a really specific way. So I loved it. And
yeah,
you two were a blast to work with.
Yes. We're good at that. We're good.
You
we're
are. And I know.
So good.
Yeah. So I I like the topic because it's both really specific and practical, and there's so much depth to it. And it's like one of those topics where it's like, what are those things like where at first glance it looks like one thing, and then when you look at it longer, you realize it's something else.
What is that word?
I don't know. You know what I'm talking about?
Where you like,
you see the woman's face, and then
it's a blah blah.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I feel like it's one of those. Yeah, maybe.
No,
let's go with that. Okay. It's like an optical illusion. Where at first it seems like it's just, okay, we're trying to decide if we're going to have another baby. And that's what this is. And then the more you get into it, you're like, oh shit, actually, this is a lot deeper. There is a lot more that's happening, internally and relationally, that's at stake here, and that's getting pulled up. And we are, we can either choose to go there and to let this decision become like a catalyst for that kind of self and relational exploration, or we can keep it. And of course, there are lots of decisions that are kind of a little bit more simple. But I think a lot of big life decisions really have the opportunity for a lot of growth and a lot of even healing, even kind of doing something important within the relationship, that almost like a tunnel, right? Where you come out the other side and like things are very different. Things look different now. And of course, that's not always positive, but I think sometimes, a lot of the time, it can be a really meaningful experience to move through something like a really major decision together and have so much more understanding of yourself and the other person, that stays with you even after the decision is made.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like a milestone, where it's like on the other side, you can't picture it, but on the other side, you feel maybe stronger or more connected, even though it was so hard, right? Might not have been like the most positive experience, but the act of doing something like that in partnership, in, negotiating things or sacrificing things, or compromising is probably the better word there. But where you are on the other side, like how much it's like kind of worth it, right? Or strengthens, or I don't know, continues to be, I think like this feeling of like being unstoppable in some way, or like if we could get through that, we can get through anything. Or even looking at the strengths that you have as a couple, even if you're at a standstill, like, well, we're able to do this, this, and this, right? We must be able to do this as well. So really kind of seeing it as like this positive thing, because it is like it does like stop you in your tracks. It does like put a halt in your relationship, and you're just like, what is happening?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great way to think about it, that especially if you can come through it and ideally you're both feeling good about the decision, even if it wasn't initially what you thought would happen or even what you wanted to happen, you've worked through it in a way where you can confidently say you think this is the right decision for you as a couple or you as a family or whatever. There is something like, I don't know, like you've gotten a little star, like a little
a badge of honor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You wore and you came back.
Right.
So congratulations.
Yeah. Right. So there's like that feeling of accomplishment, but then you're also like, there's so many skills that you're developing when you're doing that, right? Like like a really tough decision. There are so many pieces that have to happen and things you both have to be able to ultimately be able to do in order to move through it. Like you both have to be able to know your own thoughts and feelings and desires, right? You have to be able to express that, like actually clearly articulate that in a way that your partner can hear, and not shut down. You have to be able to hear that, and listen and care and understand it and be curious about it, especially if it's different than what you're thinking or feeling. And then you'll have to figure out how to work through that and do either some compromising or some, give and taking, or, some maneuvering around, unless you're perfectly aligned from the start to where you can both feel, like you're okay in that choice.
Which I think is a good reminder of like motivation, right? Like finding your motivation in solving the problem as well. Like if you can't like see the motivation for the couple itself or for your other partner, but the motivation of even like you being able to get better skills to feel better and better communicate, right? It's like, I mean, it's not like selfish, but like, let's focus on one.
Right.
But I think it's true because sometimes it can feel so overwhelming of like, I'm doing this for the couple, right? Or I'm doing this for the relationship, which is true. but you're also doing this for yourself. And when you can kind of release the other person in that too, like they get to choose if they're doing this for themselves as well, because then we can, two of us can like kind of create this space together that make up us or make up the couple. But it kind of, again, I think releases that expectation of holding someone or dragging someone along, which I think a lot of women feel typically of like, I got to drag along my partner. Again, that's a generalization. It's not everybody, but that like release of like, I get to do this for myself because I love myself, but I also love my partner, my relationship. But that can be like that internal motivation and maybe again, that ease into something like a program like yours of like working on the marriage itself or the partnership itself.
Yeah. I really like what you're saying. It makes me think about how important it is in a decision or just in your relationship in general. It's like you have to attend to so many things. Like you have to attend to yourself and like be interested and attuned and caring with yourself. You have to attune to the relationship and like how the bond and security and where the conflict is and all that kind of stuff. And then attuned to your partner too, and caring about their interests and their desires. And that's really complicated and that's a lot to attend to. And of course, we're not going to do that perfectly all the time. But it feels like that ability to at least have some like antenna up around that and kind of know that those are the things to be aware of and to help each other with, I think feels like really foundational to make a long-term kind of intimate partnership work.
Yeah. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it really is.
And you've been married for a very long time, 20 years almost.
Right.
So
right?
It's like, if you're not the expert, I don't know who is, girl.
Oh,
so
that's not true.
Abby, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a great time. I think just like really unpacking this idea of partnership and conflict and how we deal with it on this kind of like spanned out level. We are so excited for part 2. So if you are listening or watching, stay tuned because Abby's actually going to give us some tips of how we can get through a conflict. So thanks again, Abby, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to our show. We hope that we've normalized your experience of conflict within your relationship and given you hope that there's a way through. And if you listened and you're like, I need this for my relationship, then check out Abby's course, Making Big Decisions with Your Partner, on the How We Get Through app, available for both Android and iPhone. Stay tuned for part 2 as Abby shares her personal and professional insights on how conflict can be a point of growth for your relationship. See you there.